The quiet arrival. The carriage's final lurch sent Ilara's satchel skittering across the worn floorboards. Outside, Thorn Palace's formidable gates towered, their wrought-iron wolves snarling in silent welcome. She clenched the rough fabric of her simple dress, quashing a nervous tremor in her chest. This was it, irrevocable. A giant of a guard, imposing even seated, grunted a dismissal, gesturing towards a less conspicuous entrance. "New cleaner, is it? Name?" he barked, eyes fixed on a ledger. "Ilara Meadowlight," she murmured, her voice nearly lost beneath the retreating carriage wheels. He scrawled something illegible. "Seraphina will brief you. No lingering." Inside the palace walls, the air shifted, heavy with ancient stone, polished timber, and an indefinable scent of dominion. The side passage plunged into a maze of service corridors, a stark contrast to the grandeur glimpsed beyond the gates. Here, walls were unadorned, flagstones uneven and light scarce. A kindly, round-faced woman, apron perpetually smudged, bustled forward, a feather duster tucked under her arm. "You must be Ilara. I'm Seraphina. Don't mind old Grimsley, he's always like that. Welcome to Thorn Palace." Her voice, surprisingly bright, cut through the pervasive quiet. "Come on, dear. Let's get you settled. First, the laundry room's where your things go. Then we'll start you in the West Wing. Just dusting and sweeping today. Nothing too strenuous for your first round." Ilara offered a small, polite smile, her gaze already absorbing every detail. Seraphina's cheerful chatter proved a useful screen, as the older woman indicated buckets and mops. Unraveling the palace's intricate cleaning regimen, Ilara meticulously catalogued her surroundings. The laundry room was a vast, steamy cavern, its high windows overlooking a meticulously kept garden. The West Wing corridors stretched long, lined with portraits of severe-faced ancestors, whose painted eyes seemed to track her progress. Her initial task was straightforward: dust the ornate oak banisters spiraling up 3 floors. It was monotonous work, yet it permitted slow, deliberate movement, her vision sweeping every architectural curve. The stone walls were immensely thick, the windows mere defensive slits rather than light sources. She noted subtle flaws in the plasterwork, faint scorch marks on a particular floorboard near a grand fireplace, vestiges of some forgotten mishap. Each passing guard became an object of scrutiny, their stride, patrol rhythm, the subtle tension in their posture near specific doors. Most were young, robust men, their focus outward, rarely inward. They barely registered her, a spectral cleaner, merging seamlessly with the shadows and the scent of lemon polish. She quickly discerned the palace's cadences, the early morning clatter of breakfast dishes from the kitchens, the muffled thud of boots during the changing of the guard, the distant melodic notes of a harpsichord drifting from royal apartments in the late afternoon. Every sound, every resonance, a piece of her intricate puzzle. By midday, her arms ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She'd mentally mapped the West Wing, identified key guard posts, and even deduced which corridors saw less frequent patrols. Seraphina, bless her, proved a trove of unwitting intelligence, regaling tales of royal eccentricities and the best methods for stubborn velvet stains. "And always be extra careful around the king's study," Seraphina cautioned, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as they entered a grander, more heavily carpeted section of the palace. "He's a good man, King Lyra, but very private, and very observant. Not much escapes him, even when you think he's not looking." Ilara merely nodded, her heart giving a faint, traitorous throb. The king. The objective. She continued along a particularly long corridor draped with tapestries depicting ancient hunting scenes. Each thread, each faded hue, held a secret. Her duster brushed lightly over a heavy wooden door, the polished brass knocker cool beneath her fingers. This, she surmised, led to the private wing. From the observation deck overlooking the grand courtyard, King Lyra Thorne stood, a steaming mug of spiced tea warming his hands. His gaze drifted over the bustling activity below, stable hands leading horses, gardeners tending rose beds, and the constant, almost invisible ballet of palace staff. His eyes, keen and discerning, picked out overlooked details. A loose cobblestone near the fountain, a new bloom on the ancient wisteria. Then, a flicker, a slight, almost imperceptible movement in the western corridor below him, where the arched windows of the lower servants' entrance offered a glimpse into the palace's internal workings. A small, unassuming woman was dusting the heavy oak banister. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost ritualistic. She neither rushed nor dawdled. There was a quiet intensity about her, even in this mundane act. He'd witnessed countless new staff come and go, most eager, some nervous, all eventually fading into the background. But this one, there was something in her posture, the slight tilt of her head, as if attuned to a sound only she could perceive. Her hair, the colour of damp earth, was pulled back tightly, revealing a sharp, intelligent profile. He watched a moment longer, a flicker of curiosity stirring within him. She wasn't gazing with wide-eyed wonder like most newcomers. She was observing, studying. Like a shadow, she moved, absorbing the palace's pulse, without ever truly becoming a part of it. Lyra took a slow sip of his tea, the warmth of familiar comfort against the cool morning air. He made a mental note, the new cleaner. He would inquire about her with Seraphina later. Not out of suspicion, not yet. Just an instinct. A quiet arrival indeed, but something told him her presence might not remain so quiet for long. Ilara felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a familiar sensation she'd learned to trust. She paused her dusting, her hand hovering over a carved griffin's claw. She gave no outward sign, but her senses flared. Somewhere above, eyes were watching. She focused on the faint warmth radiating from the stone, the distant chirping of birds from the courtyard. She knew the gaze wasn't malicious, not yet. Merely curious. Good. That meant she wasn't entirely invisible. Not to everyone. Just as it should be. She resumed her dusting, her movements precise and unhurried, a perfectly innocuous cleaner, dissolving into the quiet hum of the palace. Whispers and symbols. The Royal Library's air, a timeless blend of old parchment and beeswax, enveloped Ilara as she meticulously polished ancient spines. Golden shafts of sunlight, fractured by tall, arched windows, painted the dancing dust motes, each a fleeting miniature star. Her cloth glided with practiced grace, a silent brush over leather-bound chronicles and forgotten philosophies. For 3 days, she'd charted the palace's pulse, its daily rhythms, its inhabitants' ebb and flow. But the library felt distinct, a quiet, vibrant heart within the grand structure, imbued with generations of wisdom. Today, her purpose transcended mere observation. It was deeper reconnaissance. This sanctuary, a favoured retreat for the Thorn Kings, often witnessed their thoughts taking flight. Ilara's fingers traced the intricate gold tooling on a weighty volume, a Lyra dynasty history. Shifting it to clean the shelf beneath, her gaze caught an almost imperceptible etching on the dark wood. It wasn't carving, nor a casual scratch. A subtly rendered symbol, half hidden by the book's shadow, emerged. A chill, unrelated to the cool air, snaked up her spine, stealing her breath. The symbol, an intertwined serpent and a hawk, wings outstretched, locked in an eternal dance, ancient, esoteric, profoundly familiar. Her grandmother, in the twilight of countless evenings, had whispered tales of the sky serpent accord, a myth relegated to bedtime stories for all but the truly initiated. This was its sigil, the mark of a forgotten pact, a lineage thought vanished with the dust of ages. Her hand trembled, then steadied as she replaced the book, reburying the secret. A wave of sharp, cold understanding washed over her. Her grandmother's stories weren't just folklore. They were maps to a truth far grander and more perilous than Ilara had ever conceived. The king's study, his seat of power, had been her primary objective. But the library held keys to his heritage, to their heritage. The realization pulsed through her, an electric current. This wasn't merely about observing a king. It was about uncovering a legacy. Her mission, initially framed as intelligence gathering, now felt intensely personal, woven into the very fabric of her family's whispered histories. The Thorn name, the royal lineage, connected to the sky serpent accord. It was all real. A soft click from the library's far end announced King Lyra. He moved with quiet dignity, his rich crimson robe a stark contrast to the room's subdued tones. He didn't immediately look at her, heading towards ancient cartography, his focus seemingly elsewhere. Ilara dipped her head, feigning absorption in polishing a nearby globe, its brass meridian gleaming under her ministrations. Yet, his presence was a palpable shift in the air, a heightened awareness. Lyra paused, his hand hovering over a large atlas. He then swept his gaze across the vast shelves, settling for a fleeting moment on Ilara. His twilight-hued eyes held a flicker she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or a nascent recognition. She maintained her deferential posture, her movements slow and deliberate, a cleaner lost in her task. She didn't meet his gaze directly, but felt its weight, a silent question hanging between them. This observation was different, less about palace layout, more about invisible threads binding her to this place, to this man. Lyra's lips, usually a firm line, softened almost imperceptibly, a fleeting expression gone before she could register it. He selected a thick, worn leather tome and retreated to a plush armchair tucked in a quiet alcove, its high back shielding him. Ilara continued her work, her heart thrumming with new urgency. The symbol was a silent summons, a confirmation. Her grandmother's tales, once comforting fantasy, now pulsed with undeniable truth. The innocuous task of dusting had just unveiled a secret that would irrevocably alter her mission, and perhaps the fate of Thorn Palace itself. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was a seeker, tracing the lines of an ancient prophecy. Here, under King Lyra Thorn's watchful yet unknowing eyes, the whispers of the past had found their way into the present, and Ilara was now undeniably a part of their unfolding. The king's gaze. The heavy scent of old parchment and polished oak still clung to Ilara's clothes as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors. The symbol, a serpent coiling around a hawk, was branded into her mind, each scale and feather a vivid, unsettling detail. Her grandmother's tales, once comforting bedtime stories, now resonated with a chilling historical weight. The king, Lyra Thorn. The name itself felt different, heavier, now that she suspected his bloodline was tangled in such ancient, forgotten pacts. Later that week, while Ilara was dusting the intricate carvings of a ceremonial hall, the double doors at the far end swung open. King Lyra entered, his stride unhurried, his presence an almost physical weight in the echoing space. He wasn't accompanied by guards or advisors, a rare occurrence. Ilara dipped into a low curtsy, her gaze fixed on the polished marble floor. "Good morning, Ilara." His voice, a low baritone, cut through the silence. She straightened, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment before dropping again. "Good morning, Your Majesty." He paused, a few feet away, his shadow falling over her. "The light catches the dust motes rather spectacularly in here, doesn't it?" he mused, not quite a question. "I often find myself wondering what stories these walls have absorbed." Elara offered a non-committal hum, her heart thrumming against her ribs. This wasn't typical royal small talk. "There's a small alcove," he continued, gesturing vaguely towards a dimly lit corner. "It tends to accumulate a surprising amount of forgotten things. Would you mind seeing to it? The regular staff often overlook it." It was a simple request, a minor task, yet Elara felt the subtle shift. It wasn't an order given to a servant, but a suggestion, almost an invitation. She nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." She moved towards the alcove, keenly aware of his lingering presence. He watched her for a moment longer, then, with a soft sigh, continued down the hall, disappearing through another archway. The air seemed to exhale with his departure. The following days saw a pattern emerge. Lyra would appear in her vicinity, seemingly by chance, during her cleaning rounds. A quiet nod in the grand gallery, a fleeting observation about the fading light in the winter gardens, a request for a forgotten book from a high shelf in a rarely used study. Each encounter was brief, yet charged with an unspoken tension, Elara's senses hyper-alert to his every move, every inflection. One afternoon she was polishing the bronze banister of the grand staircase, the rhythmic swipe of her cloth echoing in the vast space. Lyra descended, his footsteps silent on the thick runners. He stopped halfway down, leaning casually against the ornate rail, observing her work with an unnerving intensity. "You're very thorough, Elara," he remarked, his voice closer than she expected. She flinched almost imperceptibly, then continued her polishing. "It's my duty, Your Majesty." He descended the remaining steps, coming to stand beside her at the landing. The scent of his expensive cologne, subtle and woody, reached her. Indeed, a rare quality, thoroughness. He paused, then, "Where are you from, Elara?" The question hung in the air, sudden and direct. Elara's hand tightened on her cloth. This was it. She'd anticipated this line of inquiry, prepared for it, yet the directness of it still caught her off guard. She had rehearsed her answer, a carefully constructed tapestry of half-truths and vague details. "From the north, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "A small village on the fringes of the Whisperwood." "Ah, the Whisperwood," Lyra mused, his eyes seeming to bore into hers. "A beautiful, wild place. Do you have family there?" Elara kept her gaze fixed on the shimmering bronze. "Only my grandmother, Your Majesty. My parents, they passed when I was young." The lie felt like ash in her mouth, yet it was a necessary shield. She felt his gaze, a palpable weight, assessing, dissecting. His eyes, the color of twilight skies, seemed to search for something beneath her calm exterior. "I see," he said, his tone unreadable. "And what brought you from such a remote place to the heart of the capital, to the palace itself?" Her mind raced, sifting through the prepared narratives. "Opportunity, Your Majesty. There is little work in the Whisperwood, and I sought a better life." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "A commendable ambition." He took a step back, breaking the intimate proximity, and Elara let out a silent breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "The palace requires meticulous care. I trust you find your work here fulfilling." "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, forcing a small, deferential smile. "It is an honor to serve." He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile in return, then turned and continued on his way, leaving Elara to the echoing silence of the staircase. Her hands were clammy, her heart still hammering. His gaze had felt like a physical touch, peeling back layers, threatening to expose the intricate web of deception she had spun. He wasn't just observing her, he was seeing her, or at least attempting to, and with the serpent hawk symbol burned into her memory, she now understood that her mission had become far more perilous, far more personal than she had ever imagined. The king's curiosity was a dangerous thing, a silent predator stalking her every move. Echoes of prophecy porcelain clinks and the muted rise and fall of aristocratic voices were Ilara's constant soundtrack in the sprawling antechamber. Sunlight, splintered by arched windows, scattered a silent ballet of dust motes across the polished marble, each particle a tiny sentinel to the palace's intricate ballet of power and clandestine dealings. She drifted through the vast space, a wraith in faded linen, her broom a soft exhalation against the stone. But her ears were finely tuned instruments, sifting through the ambient murmur for whispers from the adjacent council room. Today, however, the air thrummed with a new kind of tension. Instead of the usual drone about trade routes or border skirmishes, the words that reached her carried an unfamiliar weight. The serpent hawk's shadow. A resonant voice rumbled. Master Thorn, the king's most trusted advisor, his usual measured tone, now frayed with an unusual tremor. The prophecy stirs. Ilara's hand froze, her grip tightening on the broom. The serpent hawk, the very symbol that had plagued her grandmother's feverish ramblings, etched onto ancient parchment hidden in a forgotten chest. The precise emblem that had drawn Ilara into the viper's nest. A lighter, more anxious voice responded. But Master Thorn, the last heir, lost to the wilds, presumed, vanished. A cold tendril of dread coiled in Ilara's gut. Lost heir. Prophecy. Pieces, once disparate, now clicked into place with terrifying precision. Her grandmother's fragmented tales of a forgotten royal lineage, a bloodline woven with ancient magic and a sacred duty to protect, or perhaps to reclaim. And the symbol, branded into their family's oldest heirlooms, a covenant forged long ago, now felt less a historical relic and more a stark premonition. The omens are undeniable, Thorn insisted, his voice dropping to a near inaudible level, yet Ilara, with her heightened senses, absorbed every syllable. The serpent hawk's return aligns with the awakening of the lost blood. King Lyra's reign, formidable though it is, teeters on a knife edge. Should the true heir manifest? A shiver traced her spine, not from the stone's chill, but from the sudden, profound realization that bloomed in her mind. Her mission, initially vague, propelled by a desperate yearning to uncover her family's forgotten heritage, was crystallizing into something far more perilous, far more intimately her own. Her grandmother had spoken of a dormant power, a denied birthright, but she had never dared suggest the lost heir could be. She remembered the strange, almost magnetic pull she'd felt toward the palace, an inexplicable sense of belonging that wrestled with a deep-seated apprehension. The way King Lyra had looked at her, his gaze piercing, searching, as if recognizing something ancient and familiar within her. The questions he'd posed, seemingly innocuous, yet now imbued with a new, terrifying context. He hadn't merely been curious about a new cleaner. He'd been probing, testing, perhaps even sensing the reverberations of prophecy in her very presence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the antechamber's hush. The careful facade she'd constructed, the fabrications about her humble origins, suddenly felt impossibly transparent. She was not merely an observer. She was a catalyst, a living embodiment of the very prophecy they debated. The serpent hawk symbol, once a mysterious emblem of her past, now felt like a brand, marking her as a potential threat, or worse, a pawn in a game she barely grasped. She recalled a specific exchange with Lyra, his gaze lingering on her hands, remarking on their unusual delicacy for someone claiming to have toiled in fields. At the time, she dismissed it as idle flirtation, a king's casual curiosity. Now, she understood it as a subtle probe, a test of her narrative, a silent recognition of something beyond the grime beneath her fingernails. He hadn't just been looking at her hands. He'd been looking through them, perceiving the dormant power her grandmother had hinted at, the royal lineage that pulsed beneath her skin. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. This wasn't merely about unearthing secrets, it was about her own identity, her own destiny, the lost heir. No longer a distant myth or a forgotten tale, but her. The weight of it settled upon her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. She, Elara Meadowlight, the unassuming cleaner, was the serpent hawk, the harbinger of change, the very threat, or salvation, Thorn and his advisors spoke of with such hushed reverence. The stakes of her mission had just escalated from personal danger to the potential overthrow of a kingdom, with her as the linchpin. A dangerous curiosity. The clatter of King Lyra's heavy signet ring against the polished oak of his desk was the only sound in the cavernous study. Captain Cole, ramrod straight, waited. "That cleaner, Elara," Lyra began, his voice a low thrum that hinted at a deeper current beneath the calm surface. "She's an enigma, Cale. Her movements, her gaze, always observing, yet never intrusive. There's a quiet intelligence there that doesn't quite fit the dust rag." Kyle's expression remained unreadable, though a flicker of his usual suspicion crossed his eyes. "My king, palace staff are vetted rigorously. Her records are clean." "Clean, yes," Lyra mused, leaning back in his high-backed chair, his gaze drifting to the elaborate tapestry depicting the ancient Thorn lineage. Almost too clean. No discernible past, no family ties beyond a deceased grandmother. A ghost in the archives. I want to know everything, not just what the records say, but what they omit. Her true origins, her allegiances, every breath she's taken before she graced these halls. Discreetly, Kyle. Very discreetly. Kyle's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "As you command, my king." He turned, his heavy boots making no sound on the thick rugs, and exited the study, leaving Lyra alone with his burgeoning unease and a growing, dangerous curiosity. Hours later, long after the last courtier had retired and the palace settled into its nocturnal hush, Elara slipped into the king's study. The air, heavy with the scent of old parchment and expensive pipe tobacco, felt different now. Knowing what she knew, the room hummed with unspoken histories, with the weight of her own burgeoning destiny. She moved with practiced grace, her steps softer than a falling feather, her eyes scanning every shadow, every intricate carving. The prophecy, Master Thorn's hushed words, the growing dread in her own gut, they propelled her. Her initial reconnaissance had been thorough, noting the king's habits, the subtle shifts in the dust, the faint scuffs on the floorboards that marked his favored paths. Now, she sought something more. Her fingers traced the spines of ancient tomes, each one a potential repository of answers. She ran her hand along the carved oak panels that lined the far wall, a section she'd always felt held an unusual density. A faint, almost imperceptible seam, hidden by an intricate vine motif, caught her eye. It was barely visible, a testament to the skill of its maker. With infinite slowness, she applied pressure. A soft click echoed in the silence, swallowed almost instantly by the heavy drapes. A section of the panel, no wider than her forearm, slid inward with a whisper of aged wood. Beyond it lay a dark recess, cool and still. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. Reaching inside, her fingertips brushed against something coarse, ancient parchment. She carefully drew out a bundle of scrolls, tied with a faded velvet ribbon. Their edges were brittle, the script on the outermost one a language she vaguely recognized from her grandmother's cryptic references. The archaic script of the Meadowlight lineage, the very symbol she'd seen on her family's heirlooms. Nestled beneath the scrolls, something else glinted faintly. A small, tarnished silver locket. Its surface was worn smooth in places, but the central engraving was unmistakable. A soaring hawk, its talons clutching a serpent. The serpent hawk, her family's crest. It was identical to the one on the brooch her grandmother had always worn, the one Ilara now kept hidden beneath her tunic. A cold certainty, sharper than any blade, pierced through her. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't merely a prophecy overheard. This was a direct, undeniable link. The king possessed her family's most sacred symbol, hidden in his private study, alongside scrolls written in her ancestor's hand. Why? What did he know? And how had these items, meant to be passed down through generations, found their way into Thorn Palace? Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of fear and furious questions. The delicate balance she had maintained, the carefully constructed facade of the unassuming cleaner, threatened to shatter. She was no longer just an operative, no longer just a listener. She was a key, a piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed, now laid bare in the king's inner sanctum. Her presence here, her very existence, was a declaration. And the king, with his quiet observations and his discerning gaze, was already beginning to notice. The danger that had felt distant now, pressed in, suffocating and real. She carefully placed the locket and scrolls back, sliding the panel shut, leaving no trace of her intrusion. Yet, the chamber felt irrevocably altered, the secrets it held now imprinted on her very soul. The weight of truth, the scent of beeswax and old parchment still clung to Ilara's clothes as she moved through the morning halls, a phantom weight in her pocket. The locket, a small cold disc of silver, pressed against her thigh, a constant reminder of the previous night's audacious discovery. She had barely slept, the implications of the crest, her crest, emblazoned on a royal artifact, swirling like a turbulent river in her mind. The king's study, a place of quiet contemplation, had become a chamber of profound revelation. A familiar voice cut through her reverie. "Ilara, a moment of your time, if you please." King Lyra stood in the archway of the grand hall, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through stained glass windows. He held a rolled parchment in one hand, his expression unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of polite inquiry. Her heart gave a jolt, a warning drumbeat against her ribs. He knew, or at least he suspected. The game had accelerated. She curtsied, her movements fluid and practiced. "Of course, Your Majesty." He gestured towards a secluded alcove, furnished with 2 ornate chairs, their velvet cushions worn smooth with time. "Please, sit." Ilara settled onto the edge of the chair, her senses heightened, every fibre of her being on alert. She noted the slight tremor in his hand as he unrolled the parchment, the subtle shift in his posture that betrayed a deeper purpose beneath his calm demeanor. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "I confess, I find myself intrigued by you." He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, a silken net beginning to tighten. "Your efficiency is unparalleled, your discretion commendable. Yet, there are certain inconsistencies." He laid the parchment flat on a small table between them. It was a formal document, a detailed record of her employment application. Her fabricated history, meticulously crafted, stared back at her. Her fictitious village, her orphaned status, the vague references to distant relatives, all laid bare. "Your village, Meadowlight, is listed as a small farming community in the eastern plains," he continued, his gaze unwavering. Yet my chamberlain, a man of considerable diligence, could find no record of its existence, nor any census data, no land registry, no mention in any provincial archives. It's as if Meadowlight never was. Alara's breath hitched. She had chosen the name for its poetic simplicity, a quiet nod to her true lineage, believing its obscurity would be its greatest defense. She had underestimated the king's resources and his growing interest. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, piercing through her composure. And your distant relatives? Equally elusive. It seems, Alara, that you have no past, or at least, not one you wish to share. Before she could formulate a response, he rolled up the parchment and reached for another item resting on a nearby pedestal. It was a framed portrait, small but exquisitely detailed. As he turned it towards her, a gasp escaped her lips. The woman in the portrait was stunning, her features almost identical to Alara's own, the same high cheekbones, the same inquisitive tilt to her eyes, the same cascade of dark hair. Even the small, almost imperceptible dimple that appeared when Alara smiled was present. The woman wore a gown of rich emerald green, her hand resting on a silver locket, a locket bearing the distinctive Meadowlight crest. "This," the king said, his voice now tinged with an unfamiliar emotion, a blend of curiosity and something akin to wonder, "is Queen Isolde, my great-grandmother, who vanished without a trace over a century ago." He then looked directly at Alara, his gaze intense. "And the resemblance, Alara, is truly remarkable." The locket in her pocket suddenly felt scorching hot, a burning brand against her skin. The truth, a wild, untamed thing, was clawing at the walls of her carefully constructed identity. The king wasn't merely suspicious. He was piecing together a puzzle whose final image she was only just beginning to comprehend. The ancestral pact, the lost heir, her own family's heirlooms. It all coalesced into a terrifying, undeniable reality. She had a choice. Maintain the facade, risk outright discovery and the full wrath of the crown, or offer a sliver of truth, a carefully chosen confession that might buy her time, and perhaps even earn a measure of trust. The mission, her initial objective, suddenly felt distant, overshadowed by the enormity of her personal entanglement. Her connection to Lyra, once a professional necessity, now thrummed with a dangerous intimacy. She met his gaze, her voice softer than she intended, yet firm. "Your Majesty, you are right. My past is not as I have presented it." She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the cold metal of the locket. "My name is Alara Meadowlight, and this—" She pulled out the locket, holding it out for him to see, the crest glinting in the morning light, mirroring the one in the portrait. "This belonged to my mother. It is indeed my family's crest." A heavy silence descended upon the alcove, broken only by the distant sounds of the palace awakening. The king's eyes, fixed on the locket, widened almost imperceptibly. The mask of polite inquiry had finally fallen, replaced by a raw, profound shock. The weight of truth, even a partial one, felt immense, both a burden and a strange, exhilarating release. The game was no longer about infiltration, it was about survival, and the unraveling of a destiny far grander and more perilous than she had ever imagined. A shared secret. The silence in the study was no longer the heavy cloak of accusation, but a fragile membrane stretched taut between them, vibrating with the echoes of shared revelation. Alara felt the throb of her own heartbeat in her ears, a counterpoint to the distant chime of the palace clock, marking the passage of moments that felt like eternities. She gripped her locket, the cool metal a small anchor in the storm of her thoughts. My family, my mother, she always spoke of a connection to a lineage lost to time. Alara began, choosing her words with the precision of a master artisan. She omitted the spy training, the forged identity, the initial mission. A branch severed centuries ago from the main tree. We were taught to guard our heritage, to keep the crest hidden, for reasons I never fully understood beyond vague warnings of danger and unwanted attention. She paused, her gaze sweeping from the locket around Lyra's great-grandmother's neck in the portrait to the identical one clasped in her own hand. Until now, I only had fragments, old tales, and this. She lifted her locket slightly, allowing the flickering candlelight to catch the intricate engraving. I am Alara Meadowlight. My mother was Lyra Meadowlight, and her mother before her. King Lyra, who had been listening with an intensity that seemed to drain the colour from his face, finally broke his stillness. He took a hesitant step closer to the portrait, his fingers tracing the faint lines of Queen Isolde's serene face. The shock in his eyes was profound, yet beneath it, Alara detected a flicker of something else, a dawning comprehension, perhaps even a strange sort of relief. His jaw worked, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. Meadowlight, he murmured, the name a foreign sound on his tongue. He turned from the portrait, his gaze sweeping over Alara, not with suspicion now, but with an almost bewildered curiosity. A lost branch. My historians, my advisors, they speak of a schism, an ancient dispute, but always with such vagueness. A family exiled, their names struck from the records, erased from the tapestries. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a few strands that caught the light like spun gold. But never a name, never a crest. Only whispers of a prophecy, a bloodline that would return when the kingdom was most vulnerable, a rejoining that would either save us or tear us apart. Alara watched him, her own carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the weight of his unexpected honesty. This was not the aloof, calculating monarch she had been trained to observe. This was a man grappling with a revelation as staggering as her own. Vulnerable, Alara prompted, her voice softer than she intended. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Lyra walked to his desk, picking up a rolled parchment that had been obscured by other documents. He unrolled it carefully, revealing an ancient map of Thorn, its borders frayed, its script faded. His finger traced a jagged line through the heart of the kingdom. The encroaching blight from the Shadowlands grows bolder by the season. Our northern borders are under constant siege. The whispers of dissent among the lesser lords grow louder, their loyalty wavering like smoke in the wind. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, no longer guarded but raw with a nascent fear. My father, may he rest, believed it was merely the natural ebb and flow of power. But I've always felt something deeper. A tremor beneath the surface, a sense of an impending cataclysm. He gestured vaguely towards a shelf filled with ancient tomes. The old texts, the ones deemed too fantastical for serious study, speak of a pact. A foundational agreement between my ancestor, the first King Thorn, and a powerful ancient line. A pact that ensured the kingdom's prosperity, its very existence. But the pact was broken, or so the legends claim, by a betrayal, leading to the banishment of the other party. He paused, his gaze returning to the portrait of Isolde, then to Alara's locket. And the prophecy states that only when the two lines are reunited, only when the shared secret is rediscovered, can the kingdom truly be made whole again, or conversely, destroyed by the very force meant to save it. Alara felt a chill, not from the cool palace air, but from the weight of his words. The prophecy, the lost heir, her family's heirlooms, her own existence. It was all coalescing into a dreadful, undeniable truth. She wasn't just a spy. She was the prophecy. You believe, I am a part of that reunion? She asked, the words barely a whisper. Lyra's gaze was solemn, weary. The resemblance to Isolde is undeniable. The crest, your name, and the timing. He sighed, a sound that carried the burden of his crown. I have dismissed it as superstition, as the ramblings of old women and dusty scholars. But now, with you standing before me, a mirror image of a queen long dead, bearing the very symbol of the lost line. He shook his head slowly. I don't know what to believe, but I know this. The kingdom is teetering, and if there is even a sliver of truth to these ancient tales, then we must understand it. Together. A fragile trust, spun from shock and shared vulnerability, settled between them. Ilara, the spy, found herself exposed, yet strangely seen. And King Lyra, the monarch, had revealed a depth of fear and uncertainty she had never imagined. The air in the study, once thick with accusation, now hummed with the nascent energy of a dangerous, shared secret. Unraveling history. The flickering candlelight cast long dancing shadows across the ancient parchment, illuminating the faded script with an ethereal glow. Ilara traced a gnarled finger over the elegant loops and slashes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beside her, King Lyra leaned closer, his deep voice a low murmur as he translated a particularly archaic phrase. They sat hunched over a heavy oak table in a secluded corner of the royal library, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and beeswax. And the pact, forged in blood and starlight, shall bind the two houses, Thorn and Meadowlight, for all eternity, Lyra read, his gaze lifting to meet Ilara's. A strange mix of awe and trepidation flickered in his eyes. This is more than just a historical account. It's a covenant. Ilara nodded, pulling a small, leather-bound journal from her satchel. Its pages were worn smooth from generations of handling, filled with her grandmother's elegant script. My grandmother used to tell me stories of the great unbinding, she began, her voice soft but clear. She said our ancestors, the Meadowlights, were betrayed by those they trusted most, cast out, stripped of their lands and titles, forced to live in the shadows to preserve their magic. She paused, a bitter tang rising in her throat. She spoke of a thorn with a serpent's tongue, who twisted the truth and turned the people against us. Lyra's jaw tightened. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his eyes scanning the scroll's intricate illustrations. Here. He pointed to a detailed depiction of a council chamber, figures in royal regalia seated around a grand table. One figure, distinctively adorned with a thorned crown, gestured emphatically towards another, whose face was obscured by shadow. Below them, a smaller, less ornate illustration showed a family fleeing into a forest. The symbols align. The thorned crown is my direct ancestor, King Theron, and the family fleeing. Their crest is the blooming nightshade, the Meadowlight emblem. The pieces began to click into place, forming a mosaic of forgotten history. The scrolls, meticulously preserved within the Thorn archives, detailed the early days of the kingdom, a time of shared rule and mutual respect between two powerful families. They spoke of a fertile valley, rich in arcane energy, that both houses safeguarded. Then, the narrative shifted, growing darker, hinting at growing dissent and whispers of forbidden magic. My grandmother always said the forbidden magic was a lie, a fabrication to justify the banishment. Ilara murmured, her gaze fixed on the fleeing figures. Our magic was connected to the land, to the cycles of nature. It wasn't destructive, but life-giving. Lyra found another passage, his finger tracing the words. King Theron, fearing the growing influence of the Meadowlights and their mastery of the ancient ways, declared their practices an abomination. He accused them of consorting with dark forces, of seeking to usurp the throne through unnatural means. With the support of the High Council, he decreed their banishment, seizing their lands and sealing their magic within the earth itself. Lyra looked up, his face etched with disbelief. It says here, he convinced the council that the Meadowlights were siphoning the valley's life force, draining it for their own power. Alara scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. The irony. My grandmother's tales spoke of a ritual, performed by our ancestors, to replenish the valley's energy, to ensure its bounty. Theron twisted it into a selfish act of extraction. She pointed to a faded, hand-drawn map in her journal, depicting the same valley shown in the scroll. This is the Heartwood Valley, my family's ancestral home, the very place thereon sealed our magic. A chilling realization dawned on Lyra. Sealed, or stolen, he whispered, his eyes widening. He flipped through another scroll, his movements quick and urgent. After the banishment, Theron's reign saw an unprecedented boom in the kingdom's resources. The Heartwood Valley, in particular, became a source of immense prosperity for the Thorn Line. The truth, cold and sharp, pierced through the layers of time. The great unbinding Alara's grandmother spoke of wasn't just a banishment, it was a calculated act of usurpation, a betrayal that had not only exiled a royal line, but had also plundered their ancestral power, enriching the Thorn dynasty for centuries. Alara felt a surge of raw anger, a burning ember of injustice passed down through generations, now ignited by undeniable proof. Lyra, meanwhile, looked as if the weight of his ancestors' deceit had suddenly descended upon him, his face pale, his usual regal composure fractured by the stark revelation. Their shared history, once a murky tapestry of myth and suspicion, now lay exposed, raw and undeniable, binding them in an unforeseen and volatile alliance. The fragile trust between them solidified, forged in the crucible of this unearthed betrayal. The kingdom's very foundation, it seemed, was built upon a lie. The ancient artifact, the oppressive silence of the private library, was punctuated only by the rustle of aged parchment and the occasional sigh from Lyra. Days had bled into a continuous twilight of discovery, the scrolls and Alara's journal painting a devastating picture of the past. They huddled around a massive oak table, its surface scarred by centuries of use, now littered with open scrolls, their brittle edges threatening to crumble at a touch. Lyra's fingers traced a faded diagram on a particularly ornate scroll, his brow furrowed in concentration. This symbol, he murmured, pointing to an intricate knotwork design that Alara now recognized from the hidden alcove in her family home. It appears repeatedly in these historical accounts, often alongside references to a heartstone or echo of Ethelred. Alara leaned closer, her breath catching as she recognized the motif. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. Ethelred, that's the first Thorn King, isn't it? The one who forged the initial pact? Lyra nodded, his gaze lifting to meet hers. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a dawning realization mirroring her own. Indeed. But what is this Heartstone? The texts are maddeningly vague. They speak of it as a source of power, a wellspring of truth for the true lineage. He gestured to a passage in a sprawling script, the ink so faint it was barely discernible. It says here, "Only through the Heartstone shall the rightful heir be known, and the balance of the lands restored." This isn't just about reclaiming land, Alara. This is about the very foundation of the Thorn dynasty. A chill snaked down Alara's spine. The implication was clear. The Heartstone wasn't merely a relic, it was a key, an arbiter of succession. If it could identify the rightful heir, and if her lineage was indeed the true one, then Lyra's claim, and the entire Thorn rule, was built on a lie, a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter the kingdom. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared secret pressing down on them. "My journal mentions a similar object," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. She flipped to a specific page in her worn leather book, pointing to a sketch. "My ancestor, Isolde Meadowlight, wrote of a stone that sings the truth of blood. She believed it was hidden within the palace, protected by the very magic that sustained the Thorn line." Lyra's eyes widened, his gaze flicking between her journal and the ancient scroll. Protected by magic. That explains why there's no physical record of its location. It's not meant to be found by conventional means. He rose and began pacing the length of the library, his strides long and measured, a familiar habit when deep in thought. The Thorn mages of old were renowned for their wards and enchantments. If this artifact is indeed hidden within these walls, its location would be cloaked by the most powerful of spells, perhaps even tied to the bloodline itself. But if it's tied to the bloodline, Elara mused, a flicker of an idea taking root. And if my bloodline is the true one, could I potentially bypass those protections? Lyra stopped, turning to face her, a speculative glint in his eyes. "It's a dangerous thought, Elara. Such magic can be unpredictable, even deadly, if mishandled." He paused, weighing the risks against the potential reward. "However, if the purpose of the artifact is to reveal the true lineage, then it stands to reason that the magic protecting it would not harm one of that true line." He walked back to the table, his fingers brushing the surface of the ornate scroll. These passages also speak of specific environmental conditions where the light of the solstice pierces the deepest shadow, or where the ancient roots meet the sky. Elara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. She remembered a hidden chamber she'd stumbled upon during her cleaning rounds, a place rarely visited where a strange, almost imperceptible hum resonated. It was tucked away behind a tapestry in a seldom-used wing of the palace, a place where the sun, on only a few days of the year, cast a single brilliant shaft of light deep into the gloom. "There's a room," she said, her voice gaining strength as conviction settled in. "Deep within the west wing, a small, forgotten antechamber. I felt something there, a faint vibration. And the light, King Lyra. On the summer solstice, a single beam cuts through an opening in the ceiling, reaching the floor." Lyra's eyes met hers, a shared understanding passing between them. The air in the library, once heavy with the dust of ages, now crackled with a nascent energy. The ancient artifact, the Heartstone, wasn't just a mythical object. It was real, and it was hidden somewhere within his very palace, waiting for the true heir to claim it. The key to restoring the kingdom, to righting centuries of injustice, lay within their grasp. The fragile alliance between them solidified, bound by the weight of this extraordinary discovery. They were no longer just a king and a cleaner, but two individuals united by a prophecy, on the cusp of an unimaginable truth. A unified purpose. The scent of old parchment and Lyra's subtle, earthy cologne filled the air as Elara processed the weight of their discovery. The Heartstone. A true artifact of succession, and it lay hidden within these very walls. Her mission, once a solitary, clandestine endeavour, had twisted and reformed, not into failure but into something far more profound. Lyra wasn't an obstacle. He was a mirror, reflecting a shared destiny she hadn't dared to imagine. "The summer solstice," Lyra murmured, his gaze distant, fixed on a faded tapestry depicting a golden stag. "The longest day. It aligns with the ancient texts my father kept," The ones I thought were just fanciful fables. He turned to her, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. He spoke of a true heir, a lost lineage. I always dismissed it as a king's wistful dream. Elara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a stark contrast to the icy dread that had once accompanied her proximity to the throne. This bond, forged in shared secrets and ancestral whispers, was not a weakness. It was strength. It was the missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. "My family, the Meadowlights," Elara began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We've always passed down stories of a duty, a promise to protect something, though the specifics were lost over generations. A stone, a pact, a king. It was all so fragmented." She looked at Lyra, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a target but as a partner. "I think the Meadowlights were meant to find you, to help you heal what was broken." A slow smile spread across Lyra's face, a genuine expression that softened the stern lines etched by years of kingship. "And I, the thorn, was meant to find you, the lost branch. It explains the pull I felt, the inexplicable familiarity." He reached out, his hand hovering, then gently grasping her arm. His touch sent a current through her, not of fear but of profound recognition. "We are tied, Elara, by blood, by prophecy, by fate." The room seemed to hum with the unspoken understanding between them. The elaborate gilded furniture, the heavy velvet drapes, the scent of centuries of power, it all faded into the background, leaving only the two of them, standing at the precipice of a shared future. "Righting the wrongs," Elara echoed, the phrase from her family's lore finally making sense. Not just for the Thorn line, but for the kingdom. For all the centuries of imbalance. Lyra squeezed her arm. "The Heartstone is more than a symbol of succession. It's a source of power, a conduit to the land itself. Its absence, its fractured magic, it has weakened Thorn. The blight in the western forests, the slow decline of the harvests, the growing unease among the populace. It's all connected." He let go, pacing a small circuit before stopping before a tall, arched window overlooking the sprawling palace grounds. "My ancestors, in their desperation, tried to forge new pacts to mimic the Heartstone's magic. But they were poor imitations, unstable and demanding." Elara remembered the strange, flickering lights she'd seen deep within the palace walls, the occasional tremor that shook the foundations, dismissed by the staff as old building quirks. Now she understood. The palace itself was unwell, yearning for its true anchor. "We retrieved the Heartstone," Elara declared, a newfound resolve hardening her gaze. "And then we unify the lines, your lineage and mine, the true Thorn succession." The words felt both heavy and liberating. Her entire life had been a prelude to this moment, to this understanding. Lyra nodded, his eyes bright with a determination that matched her own. "The West Wing, the chamber beneath the oldest tower. It's where the solstice sun aligns perfectly, allowing entry for those of the true blood." He paused, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "But it will be protected. Not by gods, but by ancient wards, designed to keep out all but the rightful heir." "And if I am the rightful heir, or at least a direct descendant, my blood might be the key," Elara finished, her mind racing with possibilities. The danger was palpable, a growing hum beneath the surface of their conversation. These weren't mere locks and keys. They were magical barriers, imbued with centuries of power and purpose. "Precisely," Lyra confirmed. "It's a gamble, Elara. We don't know what exactly those wards entail or what trials await within. My advisors would call this madness, but I feel it in my bones. This is the path forward." The silence that followed was charged with anticipation, a shared acknowledgement of the immense task ahead. The summer solstice was weeks away, giving them time to plan, but also allowing the tension to build. Alara walked to the window, standing beside Lyra. The sun, though still high, was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens. The distant mountains, usually shrouded in a perpetual haze, seemed clearer today, their peaks sharp against the pale sky. "A new dawn for Thorn," Alara whispered. The words a promise, a prayer. Lyra's hand found hers, a warm, firm clasp. Indeed, a unified purpose, a united kingdom. His gaze swept over the kingdom stretching out before them, a vast tapestry of forests, fields, and distant villages. His expression was no longer burdened by the weight of a fractured legacy, but alight with the hope of renewal. Alara felt it too, a burgeoning sense of purpose that transcended her initial mission. They were no longer spy and king, but two halves of a greater whole, bound by the thread of ancient magic and a shared belief in a brighter future. The air, once heavy with secrets, now hummed with the promise of a collective future. An ambitious endeavor to heal not just a royal line, but the very soul of the land itself.